Okay, so hello. In this session, we will be talking about CSS custom properties, which is a cool CSS feature which lately is having a quite decent browser support, and we will also see what workarounds we have for the outlier browsers. We are front-end developers from Pronovix, Hungary, a company specializing in developer portals, and it's really nice to be here at the conference and talk about technology that we are passionate about. Before we get too deep into the topic, let's see what exactly CSS custom properties are. As you can see above the title, there's a little glass showing that it's still a somewhat experimental feature. I mean, not all of the features are available in the browsers, but as I said, you will see that it has a quite decent browser support. What you can see on this slide is a really basic CSS declaration with a selector and property value pairs. I think all of us know this. The difference with CSS custom properties and why they are called CSS custom properties, they used to be called CSS variables, is because the syntax is very much the same, just before the property name we have two dashes, and that's what makes a property value pair actually a kind of variable definition, which is called a custom property. And how you can use this custom property is through the var function. It has two parameters. The first one is the actual name of the custom property, and the second one is a fallback value. I want you to note here that this fallback value isn't a fallback value for browsers that are not supporting the CSS custom properties, because those doesn't know the syntax at all, so those browsers won't understand the var function either. So this fallback property is rather for the cases when the value of the custom property is not available in the computed value time. What does this mean? This can be mainly two cases. For example, the property is not defined at all and therefore can be used its value, or it has a value that cannot be applied to that property. So as you can see right now, the property has a length unit, 12 pixels, and for example, if we want to use it for not a font size, but let's say background color, we cannot, because that property accepts some color unit. And as I told you, it has a quite decent browser support. You can see that all the major browsers, the latest versions of the major browsers are supporting it. And later on, we will see what we can do with the red rectangles. But before we carry on, I want to dig a little bit more deeper into CSS custom properties. As you can see in this more real-life example, as we have a real selector here selecting a paragraph, the CSS custom property is defined in the same declaration block as the place of usage. But CSS custom properties, as they are behaving the same way as properties, do use cascade as well. So you can define it in a higher level element, such as the root pseudo selector. I don't know whether you know this. This is basically selecting the root element of the actual document tree, which is, in case of an HTML document, is the HTML tag. The difference between using the root pseudo selector and the HTML tag and the HTML tag is that the root has a higher specificity. And as I mentioned that it is using cascade, you can override the value of this variable, and supposing that this paragraph tag is used inside an article, this paragraph tag will have this mid-grayish color instead of the dark gray, which is defined globally in the root area. And of course, there's a lot more to CSS properties. For example, that you can use another CSS property as the fallback value of a CSS property, and you can kind of chain this infinitely, or that you can use this scoping principle with a CSS methodology like BEM or SMAX. But we know that lunch is soon, and we don't want to steal your lunchtime. So let's see that how we are using this with Drupal. all of us know that it's nice to have an admin UI interface where the customer can change certain parameters of the site, like colors or font sizes and so on. And this is what we are using the CSS custom properties for. And Kitti will talk about our theming process a bit more.
Okay, so in our example project, we set up an example project for customizing colors, just for simplicity. And here comes the question. Why? It's fine? Okay. So in this example, we will show how to override colors. And here comes the question, why don't we use color module for that? So I did some investigation, and it turned out that it has some limitations. So for example, it requires a special structure for a theme, so it's very hard to integrate it with modern SCSS-based themes. After that, it's only suitable for changing CSS properties like colors, and so color-related CSS properties, and not font families or other global things. And also, it's only usable with that color picker that can be seen on the right. And in our project, we are working on a product-based project. So we wanted to have some kind of restriction in case of the colors. So we wanted to set up a kind of color palettes, which helps content site builders to choose a color from the color palette and make something that is in harmony. And after that, other downside of color module is that you always need to save this form again when you change the theme style CSS. So I think these are the downsides of the color module, which led to the issue, which I pasted to the bottom. And this is mostly about moving color module to contrib. So you can check the comments and the discussions here if you are interested. Okay, so Arpi has already talked about CSS custom properties. So you might see that we will use these properties in our project for overriding colors. First of all, I would like to mention how we use colors in our themes nowadays. We used to use SCSS variables for declaring global theme colors. But nowadays we switch to SCSS color maps. In this example, I only use the simple color map because it's easier to show with this. But color maps are usually useful for grouping colors. So for example, in this case, I could have created 3 different color maps for primary colors, neutral colors, and utility colors. And these colors can be retrieved using the brand color function, which we declared here, which is just a simple map-get function in SCSS. And after that, we export this colors map into a JSON file, which will be used later in Drupal, because we can process the JSON source with Drupal so that we can use the same colors in PHP, and we don't need to declare them again. And that way we can keep PHP and the theme in sync. And how to replace SCSS variables. It's very easy. You just need to change the variable to this brand color function. Okay, this is another SCSS color map, which is a color component. And we use it for declaring specific color groups, basically. Let's see an example. Color component headings is a component which we use for all the heading levels like H1, H2, and so on, and also for other threads elements on the site like card titles, legends, table heads. So this is something that is good for declaring the color once here, and this way we don't need to define the element's color every place we use it. So if we want to change the colors of all of these elements, we just need to do it here. And as you can see in this color map, we have other meta informations like the display name of the color components or the groups, and this will be used also in Drupal. So these are here just because we wanted to have every information in a single place, and after processing it to JSON, here, similarly to the colors map, we can use all of these meta informations in Drupal. And after exporting it to JSON, we generate the CSS custom properties using this nested each function for each function. And as a result, in our generated source, we will have all the color components defined, and they can be used like this. So you just use the var function on the place where you want to use it. Okay, and I will talk about the gap setup.
So we are using gap as the task runner of our choice. And on the screen, you can see a pretty basic compilation function, which is transforming our SCSS files to CSS. I'm saying that it's basic because what it does is reading the XCSS files based on some command line options called debug. It either generates the source map or doesn't generate the source map, and also the output of the CSS file will be compressed or not compressed for easier development. And for production code, it also removes unnecessary comments from the text. So I said that this is simple, but you might remember these two lines from the previous slides where we said that we are exporting some SCSS variables to JSON files for being used in Drupal. And that's for this we are using an experimental feature of the libsass library, which is called functions. And for using this, you have to import this node.sas export library, which is defining the export function that you can see on this slide before, which basically has two parameters. The first one, the actual name of the JSON file we want to save the values, and the second one is the variable that we want to export. And using it, it's that easy. You just say that I have this function, I want to use it, and you provide the theme path where the JSON file you want to be saved. So you remember this nested color map from the previous slides, and this is how it looks in JSON. So it's pretty much the same structure, that just a different syntax which can be consumed by PHP. And you might also remember this slide about browser support, and that we have some things to do here regarding IE. Generally speaking, there won't be a time when all the browsers will support all the CSS features in the same way. So to overcome this issue, I think that most of us knows autoprefixer, which is basically a library that is adding vendor prefixes, and this way making it possible to have the same look of the site on different browsers. We are using autoprefixer through PostCSS, which is a library, which is a JavaScript library for transforming CSS files. But autoprefixer alone doesn't solve the problem of CSS variables, because CSS variables or CSS custom properties isn't just a vendor prefix, but it's actually a new feature. So for CSS custom properties, we have found a PostCSS plugin called PostCSS Custom Properties, which we can feed to our PostCSS plugin list. It has some parameters, but the default are just fine for our use case. And what this does is that you can see on this slide a simple output of the libsass library with the usage of CSS variables. After running the PostCSS plugin, it adds this line. So what this line does, that it computes that at the place of usage, what the value of the CSS variable would be, and it adds it statically. So all the browsers that know CSS variables will first use this static value and then immediately override it on the next line with the CSS variable. And all the others that don't understand CSS variables, like IE, will use this static value. And now let's see that how all these things are coming to the Drupal admin UI interface.
Yeah, so now we have everything necessary for Drupal. So we have the JSON sources. You might already seen this. And after exporting all of these to JSON, we can process it with PHP. And the elements of this color components JSON file will give the elements of the theme settings form. So basically the input fields. And the exported JSON from the colors map will give us the allowed values on the theme settings form. So basically this is the color palette. This is the first version of the UI. And in this first version, we just used a simple select field. And as you can see, the elements are basically the color palette. But this is not very user-friendly because site builders might not know what these RGB values are, so what are the real colors for that. So we decided to use color field module for this purpose, and we used the color box widget for this. But color field module only provides field widgets, and for this we needed form elements, so I needed to tweak it a bit. And there's also an issue about using color field widgets as form elements. I pasted the issue URL here, and I added my own solution for the form element, but it would be great to have everything in color field module. And we are up for contributing, so we are looking forward to answer from the maintainers. And so after saving the form, this is where the overrides are generated. This is a simple page attachments alter hook. And as you can see, we fetch the overridden colors from the theme settings. And we generate the CSS custom properties from the overrides. And we add it to the HTML head. And it's important to note that we use body selector to add the overrides. And it's because RP has already mentioned that the default values are usually added to the root element. And this way we can make sure that all the colors will be overridden for sure, because body is stronger if we consider the inheritance of the properties. Okay, but let's see an example how it works. Okay, so I set up an example project for that, and this is an example UI kit where we changed the headings color from brown. And let's see how it looks if we select green color. Okay, if we save the form and we go back to the site, we can see that it's all green, and also the card header, because it was connected to the same color component. Another example is the divider, which is gray now. And if we select another color for that, it's in another group, so divider line should be brown now. Okay, and we have two color overrides now, and let's see how the configuration looks like. And as you can see, only the two overrides are in the configuration, and it was an empty array before. Okay, and if we inspect one of the elements, we can see how the color where the color comes from. It's a color component heading custom property, and we can check how the value is generated. And as we can see, the headings color is coming from the body selector, and it has a green color. Okay. And I also wanted to mention that in our project we only used custom properties for overriding colors, but it's also suitable for overriding other properties like font family or margin. As you can see here, you just need to adjust the theme settings form and change the input elements to other ones to have other overrides.
So let's wrap it up and see how our theming pipeline and customization options are working in order. What you can see here is the output of the libsass library. So all our SCSS files are compiled into CSS. After that, we run our post-CSS plugins for IE compatibility, and it generates the static color or static values of the CSS custom properties in the proper places. And after this GAP task has run, we deploy our site. The site builders are coming and doing some customizations on the page, which means that in the body, we might have new custom properties with different values. And if you think back on this chart, then you see that IE still doesn't support CSS custom properties. So it's a fair question to ask that, does this UI customization option work on IE? And the answer is that, unfortunately, no, it doesn't. But the good thing is that there's another solution that can make this work, which is not generating these CSS custom properties as part of a GAP task, but rather include another library like CSS source polyfill, which computes all these static fallback values for IE on the client side. So this way, it adds a little bit load to your front end, but you can support from IE9+. So thank you for your attention. And before we heading to the question section, I would like to mention that we are hiring as well. We have open positions in backend, front end, as well as UX designer. And we are always happy to see new people who are interested in a new field in our trainee program. You can find more information on the links, or you are welcome at our booth area if you are interested in any of these or just want to have a chat with us. Thank you. So the question is that what's your opinion about going back to CSS with post-CSS help and saying goodbye to Sass? So I guess that it would mean that only write CSS code with all the experimental features and use post-CSS as a transform tool to make all these things working in the browsers. I think that we are using Sass quite heavily, so it will be quite of a big change. And how I see right now that the way to go is to combine the two, and this is actually what we are doing. Maybe in the future we will switch from Sass to only post-CSS, but anyway we have to use some task runner to make the CSS compatible with the browsers. So I think that both of them has the pros and cons. Our choice is combining two and try to have the best of all. So if no more questions, then thank you very much.
There's a gift for you.